Welcome our designers Jan de Coster, Todd Ellis, Mia Meusberger and Johanna Pichelbauer from the Hello Robot exhibition that is still up only till tomorrow in the exhibition hall. And I also welcome Mark Kuckelberg, the philosopher of media and technology from the University of Vienna. We will hold a panel discussion starting at 4:30. But to begin, two designers will present keynote lectures about their current research, their projects, and their take on the topics of how design between human and machine is shaping our lives. And I welcome Jan de Coster to the stage now to start that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, my name is Jan de Coster. Thanks a lot to the MAC for inviting me in this amazing building and this wonderful city. I've been to Austria a lot, but this is my first time in Vienna, and I'm enjoying this really a lot. So the title of my presentation is On the Brink of Consciousness, and this is maybe a little bit heavy for this kind of weather, but in about 30 or 35 minutes, this will hopefully make sense to you. When you talk about people on the street, about robots, this is still the most common image people have of robots. So it's an industrial machine that's welding our cars together, and that is still the most common application, of course. This is what people use these robots for. So they're mostly dangerous tasks, they're dull or dirty, or you need complex movements to fulfill these tasks. So this is what in general, a robot is by the most public opinion. But this makes it a robot too. And this is not the kind of robots I would like to talk about today. And this is not the kind of robot that most people dream of when they're a kid or when they dream about what a robot could be one day. Robots are facing a lot more interesting challenges right now. So we're expecting them to be autonomous. They'll have to function in our world, so they'll have to take some form of humanoid shape. And we trust them with more and more complex tasks that our lives maybe depend on in some cases. At some point, that's, people are even discussing, maybe not in Western Europe, but at least in other parts of the world, people are discussing the possibility of loving a robot and having a meaningful relationship with these machines. So the question is, what do the robots think about this? How they're looking at these challenges we're posing on them. I'm running a small design studio that's called Slightly Overdone in Belgium. I have a one-man studio, but I'm working together with many lovely partners on several projects. And I started making physical installations about 20 years ago now. So I was making a lot of machines that were really cool to experience, like this bungee Viper we made for Dodge. So I was working in advertising a lot. And this is where I learned working with the technology and the electronics to make physical interactive installations. The other part of my career, about 15 years ago, was about character design. So I was making a lot of games and other interactive applications, and I discovered I loved making characters. So characters are not just a drawing, but they also have a story behind them, and they're engaging for people who interact with them. So the people are curious what is going on with this character, why is it designed this way. And then one magical day, 5 years ago, I got a call from a company in Belgium, an advertising agency, and they asked me if I could make them a robot. And suddenly these two worlds collided. The physical installations and the character design came together. Of course, it made sense all of a sudden. I was a robot designer. And that's what I continued doing since. So this was the first robot I ever made. Its name is Yami. And he was a host on a website for kids who were collecting little cards in a supermarket chain with recipes from all over the world. They could visit the website of the supermarket chain, and then Yami would present them with a recipe with these ingredients. So he's a kitchen robot, as you can see, but he doesn't do any cooking by himself. So he looks like he belongs in that kitchen environment, but he has no purpose there at all, except for entertaining people and telling kids an interesting story. I had never built a robot at that point, so I was learning really fast in just the 4 weeks I had to complete this machine. And since I didn't have a lot of time, most of the more complex parts I was using in this robot, I just bought in the stores or in second-hand stores or everywhere where I could find them. So this is my son Lucas. He is, of course, the one on the left, not on the right. And my kids, of course, they experienced the design, the birth of this robot from very close, so in our home. And a very amazing thing happened when Yami was completed. So, of course, I could already expect that my kids would love this robot, but other kids, of course, where he was intended for, loved them too. But also adults, people I just met, giving lectures or workshops, they were really enthusiastic about this character, Yami, I created, which is really a very unuseful robot. He doesn't do anything useful for us. He doesn't complete all these dangerous, dull, or dexterous tasks at all. He's just sitting there, watching you, and makes you wonder what he is thinking. That's all he did. And still people were really loving him a lot. So I decided I was going to continue making robots. I was opening my robot design studio. I didn't have any clients at all, but I was just going to fake my way into the robot design industry. And that's what I did. I continued making robots because I imagined when I was a really small kid that this was what robots were supposed to look like. Really cool, awesome, not useful at all, but having an interesting story behind them. That was really the key for my robots, their story, their background story, and the impact they had on the people around them. This is Hurp. Hurp doesn't do a lot except for being cool. He dresses cool, he's very conscious about the things he wears. And for the rest, he's just hanging out with us. This is the concept of the robot we're using in workshops a lot. So there are about 200 or 250 Hurps now at this point all around the world. This is Bill, this is Ted, and this is Remy. Remy sits in our living room a lot and he pretends he can read. He's a big music fan and he's featuring in some short movies I've been making. About 2 years ago I made a short film, Rise of the Robots, about climate change and what robots think about that. You can check it out on my website if you want. This is Jeff. And Jeff, he's a camera robot. I'll skip to this slide, yeah. So Jeff, he travels the world. He spent some time in Mexico and he was also 4 months in Peru last year. And he takes photos of people that are standing in front of him and then posts these photos on Twitter with his comment in a language only he understands. So we can only guess what he is commenting. But an interesting effect was that every morning I woke up and I had about 200 photos of these small kids smiling at Jeff and then having a fun time with this robot. And that is, as a designer, of course, very nice to see you have fans all over the world. But what was the intent of this robot was especially to demonstrate that you can transfer the agency of, for instance, taking a photo to a robot. So you could put this robot here, around in the middle here, and he would take photos, and then in the end of the day, or in the evening, you would see what was interesting enough for the robot to to take a photo of. Because you see there is even some pieces in the exhibition, Hello Robot here, that reference to that. Many people are experiencing reality through their smartphone right now, looking through the camera. If you visit the Hundertwasser building there, nobody's looking at the building, they're looking at their smartphone at the building. So with Jeff, that could be, that's a commentary I try to make there, that if you carry Jeff around, he'll just take photos and you will see what was interesting enough at the end of the day. Norbert was an experiment to work with only with parts that I designed from scratch, so using a 3D printer and laser cutters. While you can see, of course, obviously with Jeff here, I was still using a lot of materials that I found in second-hand stores and on eBay. And of course, this is Robin. Robin is here part of the Hello Robot exhibition. She's missing an eyebrow right now, but that's cool. That's Robin. That we will fix that. It's just a sign that she had a really fun summer, I think. Robin was created as a companion for Rachel that I will tell you about later in my presentation. And I created her as a transgender robot because I thought it was funny to send a transgender robot to Moscow because that was what she was first made for a robot design festival in Moscow. She stayed there for 7 months. When the exhibition opened, the mayor of Moscow came along and he had to bring his security team with him to sweep everything in the exhibition for dangerous machines, and they never discovered that there was a transgender robot in there. So that was a small victory for me. You can see her for yourself, of course, in the exhibition here. Steve was, he's the largest robot I made until a few weeks ago. Steve is a host, a presenter. He works at a movie theater in Belgium, the Kinepolis Group. And he was made to present on stage like what I'm doing right now, to announce new movies or to hang out between the movie theaters, to talk to people and to do interviews about their movie experience. So he can slide up and down, and he can slide down to people's or even children level and then have a conversation with these people. At some point, of course, it's obvious that he will communicate through a sophisticated AI engine, but right now we're using a voice actor that is backstage and that can push these conversations to a comical level that it's not possible right now with the most advanced AI engines. But it's ready to accept a more funny AI engine any moment. But right now we're operating it with 2 people. I'm usually in the neighborhood so I can control his wheels so he doesn't run over people, and the voice actor is hidden. But still people connect me to the machine. They say, this guy has a remote, obviously, so he has some involvement with this machine. And then many people ask me what AI engine we are using because it's so amazing, it looks so real. And you know, just the guy with the mic back there, it's people want to believe that there is more complex and advanced software that are being used, and people are ready to accept this kind of technology in this kind of applications. Another really cool observation is that if a robot does an interview with you, you're answering questions that you would never answer when a human interviewer would ask them. So people, the threshold to start telling your deepest secret is a lot lower with this kind of character, with this kind of robot. And that is also a really interesting observation, of course. This is Vern. Vern is a service robot. So I went to InnoRobo in Paris this year, and I saw a lot of service robots that are working on in agriculture in France, or disarming bombs, like you can see here in the exhibition. So I thought, they're really awesome robots, sort of like the tough guys of the robot family, and none of them has a really cool face to go with that. So imagine you're in a radioactive, contaminated building that's on fire and being flooded for anything bad that can happen. You're lying on the ground, you're waiting for your rescuer, and then this robot drives in, and it's just this boring machine, and it's just one arm. Imagine there would be a cool face there, and a robot driving in and saying, I'm here to save your day, and just grab on, and I'll pull you out. I imagine that would reduce stress levels a lot at that moment, and if not, it's just a really cool robot platform to do experiments with. I have a short film with Vern on online on my website, and in a few weeks he will go to Eindhoven to the Dutch Design Week in a more advanced stage where he has a container to transport dangerous or hazardous materials around, or even deliver pizzas or something. His companion in the short film is Barkley, and his story is not written entirely right now, but he's more the humanoid shape that I'm working on right now. So more shaped like people, but still distinctive enough to see that this is not just a person with a mask, but clearly a robot. Leo is the biggest robot I've built up to this point, and I spent most of the summer building this robot. This is Leo in action. Leo was built for an event, a festival in Belgium that was made to let parents and their children connect with their first endeavors in the digital world. So we talked about this just a few minutes ago. So everybody lets their kids have an iPad, but often these young people don't have any idea what the risks that they're exposed to when they put all their private lives just on the internet. So Leo is a metaphor where kids, teenagers, can take place inside the robot, and their parents are on the side, and they can control the wheels of this robot. The kids are controlling the arms, and together they drive around in this room, and they can pick up some hazardous materials and put them in a safe place. It's worked as more or less like we expected. So in the beginning, parents are of course really excited to drive around the robot, and they drive around really quickly, and then they realize, oh yeah, that's my kid inside, and he's going to throw up any minute now, so we'll better drive a little bit more slowly and see that we can achieve this goal. And all the kids, of course, were really excited. I don't have better photos at this point because we still have to do the official photo shoot, but that will follow in a few weeks. So from the beginning of my robot building career, I realized that nobody I knew was waiting for my kind of robot, so I had to teach people that this was a really cool idea. So I started teaching about making robots to all kinds of creative people, to kids, to everybody who wanted to listen. And what I discovered was that making these, showing these flaws in the designs of the robots, they don't walk, they have problems communicating, most of them are blind, and we have to help these robots to get along, to get around in the world. And this is what shows us often what we think of other people, how we react to people in the world that have some disabilities. Like, for instance, Remy, I drive around with him a lot in a second-hand wheelchair I bought. And the reaction of people with this wheelchair is, of course, often, oh yeah, it's a person in a wheelchair, don't pay too much attention, and they say, oh, wait, this is a robot inside this wheelchair, what's going on? And then suddenly you have all the attention. And that's a strange thing, of course, that a human being in a wheelchair is something you want to avoid, and a robot in a wheelchair is then something suddenly you are drawn to or are curious about. So these are some photos of the workshops I'm giving all over the world. It's bringing me to really cool places, and that's something I'm really, often really grateful for. Like I said, this is the design of Hurp I showed before, and there are hundreds of these right now. That brings me to a more complex project we did this year. Last summer we started on it, but it was rolled out early this year. And this is Walt. Oh, sorry. Walt is working in the Audi factory in Brussels right now, and it was a project I did with VUB, the University of Brussels, and then RoboVision, people who are deep learning and AI experts that I work with a lot from Ghent. And it was only a year ago that I managed to convince the consortium of this project that this robot needed a face and something you could put your attention to if you were talking to him. So what is Walt? Walt is a cobot, a collaborative robot that is standing in the middle of the factory. There are about 400 other robots in this factory, but most of them are in cages, so you cannot touch them. They're really dangerous, they're really fast. You could get really hurt if you're in the same area. But this cobot, he knows that there is a human being around, so he has 3D cameras and capacitive touch technology that can sense when there is a human body around, so he slows down or even avoids this person. As an extra, this robot can receive voice and gesture commands. So the people operating this machine can stand in front of him, they say, "Hello, Walt," and then they have to give him commands about the type of car they're making. So they can tell him the make, the model, how many doors the car has. They can speak to him, but there is a lot of noise in the machine, so they can also use gestures. So they show their hand, and then he responds to these people with his face, sometimes giving very clear alphanumerical information, but often just with really simple gestures, just nodding his head, saying yes or no. And this is what makes, of course, what brings some humanity to this place in this factory. Because it's hard, not many people are allowed inside these factories, but this is a place where maybe 10 or 20 people are walking around between 400 or 500 robots. You often think, who is working for who here? Are the people just taking care of the robots? Are the robots in charge? And are human beings just there to fix the little problems the robots cannot fix? So by my opinion, this was one of the extras that wasn't really necessary for this project, but that works really well. So there was, of course, a lot of friction during this project from different parties involved. So for Audi, this machine works just as well without a face. For the factory workers there, they couldn't take it really serious in the beginning because are they making fun of us? What is going on here? Is this supposed to make us happy? But in the end, if you the machine works like it's supposed to. It's been working there for over a year now. So after a while, it just blends in with all the rest. And the effects, the fact that this is almost a human co-worker, that stays. And that is, of course, amazing. So in the spring of this year, there was then an official press moment where everybody, the Belgian press came and took photos. And of course, most of the photos that you saw in newspapers were about the face of Walt, his head, while the machine is, of course, a lot bigger than this. It just shows that even people who are not so familiar with robot technology also acknowledge that there was time that robots like this got a face and a head, of course. This is a quote from an unlikely robot specialist, Anais Nin. We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And this is something, since I discovered this quote, that I am really aware of. If you're making a story, a background story, if you're doing character design, a lot of this development of this story is just happening by exposing this robot to the people, to myself also, of course, during the process, but just by anybody around us. This is where the true story of this robot is coming together. And this is very true for robots, but it's also true with any kind of design object that you can make. People are observing this object, and then they're bringing all their history, all their emotions, all their state of mind at this moment to the appreciation of this object at this point. So this is Sophie. She had to be in the presentation since her brother was in there too, so just to be on the safe side, my daughter. This brings me to the last character robot I want to talk about, and that is, of course, Rachel. Rachel was created for an exhibition for Pictoplasma in Berlin a few years ago, and she was especially designed for this exhibition. She was going to stay in Berlin for 3 months, then they moved to Mexico, to Monterrey for 6 months. She was home in between for 4 weeks, and then they went together with Robin to Moscow for 7 months. So the whole time she was traveling and other people had to take care of her. I could not fix anything that went wrong, so she's really simple in design, and her interaction is very limited. But compared to that, her presence, her character is very, very strong, and people reacted very positive to her. So what I noticed was that people in Mexico, for instance, started sending me tweets and Instagram posts to tell me that Rachel was okay, she's doing fine. I didn't expect people to treat her like this character, like this almost artificial life form. People could just assume this is just a machine. It's a yellow and black machine that has a purpose. But this story, this character, the person Rachel, it automatically came to people when they interacted with her. And that is, of course, an amazing observation for me as a designer, because that was an effect I didn't intend in the beginning. Rachel is based on the character Rachel from the first Blade Runner. Of course, very exciting. Next week, the next Blade Runner is coming to theaters. We're even in the city of the Hundertwasser building, which is a very obscure Blade Runner 1 reference. I don't expect anybody to understand immediately. But apart from that, Rachel in the film, for people who didn't see the first movie, I'll try not to spoil everything, but she needs other people to feel real. And that is exactly the same as with our Rachel. So if people treat her like the person Rachel, she almost becomes like a real person, like any other person you see around you. Of course, she's not biological life, but that's not necessary to conceive somebody as a person. So how can you make sure that the person sitting next to you is really conscious? So I don't see any obviously unconscious people, which I'm grateful for at this point of the presentation. You're not sure of that. You're assuming this because you can have a conversation with these people. You assume by the looks of these people that they have had a life before they came in here. They have been living a life for several years. So that's how you can assume that these people are having a conscious life at this moment, and they have some notion of what it means for them to be a person. So there are some people investigating the nature of consciousness that are convinced that our consciousness is an effect from our social interaction. If you would not have any social interaction with anybody ever, which is a philosophical thought experiment, the question is, would you then be conscious? Would you then have an idea of what your person is? So imagine for a moment that you, in a few years, you will be able to have a conversation with a robot that has all the same capabilities to have a conversation with you, that has a social life, that goes out in the world after it's completed its tasks, and then maybe has interactions with all kinds of other people. At what moment, or at what point will you be able to assume this robot must have a consciousness? he must have an idea of what self means. He must have an idea of what his future looks like, what his past looks like, and what its place is in the world. This is one of these amazing photos that I got from a mother in Moscow. I don't know this person, just received it on Instagram one day. She's taking this photo with Rachel and her daughter. And they have this moment here. I'm obviously seeing a lot more than there is as a designer here. But just allow me to do this. They're having this moment here, and this girl is having a real connection with maybe the person Rachel here. And my dream is that at one moment, maybe it's in a few decades, maybe it's in a few hundred years, there will be a moment where a robot, just like Rachel, will enjoy this moment just as much as this girl is doing. And that would be, obviously amazing for me. So this is where I'll end my talk for now. I have a lot of videos and moving images on my website, so go check it out. I'll be here in the panel discussion, so you can ask me questions later, or if you just see me, ask me more about robots, and I'll thank you for your attention. Thank you.
So, yes. Hello, I'm Tal Erez. I'm a designer and curator. And though the title of the lecture is a bit grim, I hope we can end with an optimistic tone. But I want to start with a bit of a historic reference. In 1962, there was a World Fair in New York, and by then, DuPont was, I think, the largest chemical company in the world, producing, among other things, a lot of branded plastics, new innovations like Dacon, Teflon, nylon, etc. A lot of developments were done during the Second World War. And DuPont's pavilion in 1962 was an interesting one because they have decided not to showcase their products, but rather do a musical show. So I just give you a little taste and then we talk about it.
Everything in the world, you know, is made up of molecules, and some of the most useful are those that form versatile plastics, like Allothon, Delrin, Lucite, Teflon. Here's what we mean. Oh my. Molecules.
There are plastics in your toaster, in the blender and the clock, in the lamp and in the roaster, on the door and in the lock, in the washer and the dryer, and the garden tools you lend, in your music amplifier and electric fryer. You have got a plastic friend.
You can see the full thing online. This was a complete celebration of plastics, which by that time, as they sing, was everywhere. It was in the paint on the roof, it was on the cables of our house, it was in the glue of everything, in the shoe, in the dryer, in the washer, whatever they say. Complete celebration of this new material that promised us an amazing new future. But this was not a destined situation for this material, which by that time was less than 100 years old. And of course, we also know that this was not the situation or the feelings we had about plastics about 30 years later, when it became this kind of ecological catastrophe. In 1944, in Scientific American published a piece saying, will plastics become the miracle people predict, or will it go away? And the thing is that the way this technology has developed and entered our lives is not as predestined as we would like to believe. It was actually based on a lot of strong movements by a lot of, let's say, strong interest groups. For example, after the Second World War, there was such huge production lines that those plastics needed to be sold. But instead of being sold to producers, they were sold to the public as an idea. So this is not a commercial for potato chips, it's a commercial for cellophane, which is the plastic that wraps it. And this is not a commercial for stockings, it's a commercial for nylon. And this was in Life magazine. This was targeted at housewives and let's say, the everyday people. And through them, they got the producers to buy into this new technology. So it's a lot about the way it's communicated and this idea that a technology sells us. It also has a lot of kind of national ideals, or it sells quite a lot of, let's say, ideologies. So Plasticville, USA was a little city of for model trains, which really embodied kind of the American town of the 1940s. So the Frosty Bar, the grill, the gas station, the Catholic school. And of course, it also deals a lot with power and lobbying. So DuPont became a very big company and very successful several times. The most prominent one was they were the ones that got the commission to produce all the nylon for the US parachutes in the Second World War. So we have a tendency to think that technology is kind of out of our hands. It's progressing naturally, it's in the hands of scientists, maybe lobbyists. But I think technology is progressing in unpredictable ways and through unpredictable channels. I'm here today to talk about a project that I've done here that we'll see in a bit, which deals with 3D printing, which I have been exploring for a few years. But I thought it would be nice to take you through the process. I have looked into the future of this technology. And as a designer, it started off kind of very basically around aesthetics and specific aesthetic qualities. So the first thing I done was create kind of a physical sketches, so a palette of ideas about what this technology could mean. It started with very small details, like the fact that 3D printers can print different qualities of materials seamlessly. So from soft to hard, from structural to detailed. It made me think about these new tools once you connect a physical object into a digital experience, what kind of tools we might use, like digital clay to shape things, and that would be connected, and then we can reprint things. About different applications it could have around our house, how it can fix things or be very specific in its tasks. But also gradually, when you think about this idea, not only the physical connects to the digital, but also the digital connects to the physical. So what happens, for example, when we print objects infected with viruses for different reasons? And what would people do when they're against it? So what kind of counter movements, very natural, back to nature, would exist? I was also starting to think about how this new technology could open up new types of products that I can deal with. For example, the electric socket, things that are usually not designed by the, let's say, the conceptual designer. But how these things can be reimagined when they can be printed in small scale, and how they can become a new type of aesthetics in the house. But also what kind of business models do we need to think about when we want to introduce new products like these. And gradually I also started to figure out that this is not even a question that we can easily answer, because it's not, if we imagine this kind of growing digital catalog of objects, when objects become a digital file, then we can imagine the Google object that kind of has an endless, let's say, all possibilities of all products online. So it's not really a question of a final design product anymore, but it's more a question of either curating or influencing a product. So somehow, how do you personalize the product through your interaction with its design stage rather than its assembly or application? I started expanding my search and thinking, what does it mean about our public space when retail spaces are suddenly online, when we manufacture at home 3D printing is one technology. There's other technologies for manufacturing at home. And what does it mean about those huge lots that IKEA sits on and the ground floors of every building in the city? And what does it mean about the way we live, the way apartments are designed, when we can think about objects that are designed through time and not only through space? So when we don't have to store something indefinitely, but that we can shred the chair and print the bed with it later, or something like that. And as the story grew, I started to see it as kind of a very social question. Even revolutionary in a way. Like Gutenberg's printing press, kind of the distribution of knowledge has had its almost direct influences with the Lutheran Revolution, with the printing of the Lutheran Bible. As the Industrial Revolution, distributed consumption allowed for all people to consume products and kind of generated an economy of goods, and has led in its turn to about 150 years of workers' rights revolution, specifically Ford, of course, but other companies as well. And as the internet, the distribution of information has been still unraveling in terms of the revolutions that it has been producing, whether it's the Arab Spring, but it's also, of course, the way we educate ourselves and everything, and you know it better than I do. The idea is that with the idea of distribution of the means of production is really a Marxist kind of notion, right? That who owns means of production is in charge, and when we own the means of production, this is really an opening for kind of a Marxist revolution where we can all unite and imagine this kind of holistic idea. We are the owners, we are the producers, we are the makers, and we are, of course, the designers, and we are the consumers. And again, this has quite a lot to do with this relationship between the digital and the physical. Because one of the criticisms about 3D printing is that not everybody wants to design their own stuff. People are not necessarily want to be engaged in every single step of production. But kind of like the internet before the internet we had, basically you could either be a journalist or a reader, and the internet has introduced us to a big spectrum in between. We can just comment, we can write a blog, we can be journalists ourselves, and we can decide where we lay ourselves on that spectrum. So a lot of the functions of products has been introduced to us as tools that we can finally use, which were out of our hands before. So we have different, let's say, tools of creativity mediated to us and let's say, slightly curated for us. We have the possibilities of easily opening stores and selling our products. We are a very big part of marketing and writing comments, and if anybody has ever bought something online on Amazon, you usually look at comments rather than ads and opinions, ratings. And of course, we can easily fund ourselves. We can find our own VCs. We don't have to be a startup on Silicon Valley. We can find $30,000 for any cause almost, and you hear this, I don't know, in Israel there's a lot of stories, people getting money to finance someone's lawsuit if he fails, like a journalist or something like that. So there's quite a lot of spectrum also in this. So with this idea that also production is suddenly in our hands, I think it's a really strong paradigm shift to this whole idea of the economy of goods. So suddenly the brand becomes platform. We have the possibility to produce, to distribute, to sell, to market. And suddenly the gap and the dialogue becomes a much stronger one through a platform, through an interface between designer and consumer. And that positions the designer, I think, in quite a strong place. He has to take a step back. So he's not designing an object anymore. He's designing a system. And within the system, different elements can join in and create some sort of community or not. But he has this possibility of taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture, because he is no longer a screw in the system. this was one of kind of the first ideas I had about this new ideas of interfaces and how we can think about creating a relationship with consumers through the search of design, of shape. So this is when QRs were a bit more popular. But this was a vase which you would print, and then every QR on it was an iteration of the shape of the vase. So, but you had to destroy the vase to kind of search for the next shape until you reached the point where you said, well, but I don't want to destroy this. So this is kind of your own design process, and it was built on a premise that is now very existing, which is that you can shred and reprint with the same material. Which brings me, though, to the project we are dealing with now, because this holistic idea of designer, consumer, manufacturer has slowly become a question for me. And it started again with this very simple premise of saying, look, 3D printer owners use it for about an hour a day. And 23 hours a day it sits idle. So it's very safe to assume that you can very easily rent this time out. When I did this project, a new company opened up. It's called 3D Hubs today. Recently, they got their next round of financing, $30 million or something like that. And that's exactly what it does. It says if we think of every 3D printer in our neighborhood as a machine that we can rent out, then we can also introduce mass production for everybody. So I can utilize all your printers to print an object at the same time, because one of the strongest problems with printing is time. But that, and then they all travel to the collection spot, etc. But that brings this new kind of holistic designer, consumer, manufacturer a step back. Then he becomes the operator of a machine. He's a factory worker producing things with his own printer for other people. Also, quite differently, he's doing it not in a surrounding that allows him to unionize or know any other person that is also participating in this event. So basically what you get is kind of a worker that is anonymous and is sitting somewhere at his home, a place that cannot be regulated. It's very hard to enforce laws at home, so if anyone has ever grown weed at home or something like that, he probably knows. And creates this kind of new system that is actually quite grim. This kind of potential of this distribution of the means of production becomes quite a grim situation where at the top of this chain sits the designer, which is commissioning, which is getting the financing, and which is producing. The purpose of this project was to only illustrate a few options of what this could mean. Does it produce, like the Model T, like the Ford, this kind of working class again? Does it utilize these new systems to create illegal or dangerous products? Or does it use it, like that icon on the top, to produce a new type of community of manufacturers that can collaborate on a local scale to produce their own environment, or to use, like the music drum thing, to produce creative interpretations and inspire them to be part of the design process? Anyway, I think it's a role for the designer. It's an application for the designer. And I think the influence that we have by choosing applications is very strong. So when we look at the future, if I'm coming back to the beginning, if we look at the future of 3D printing and we ask ourselves a bit, what can it be, or what influence would it be if we look at plastics back then? We see very similar kind of notions in the way it's being branded. So nobody knows exactly what it's good at, the 3D printer. Everybody heard the hype, but nobody knows what we should use it for. But still, the companies sell this technology as something that we should have, kind of like the plastic. They sell the technology, but not the application. Certain companies use the gap of regulation in this technology to make us less knowledgeable. With this technology that's supposed to make us producers knowledgeable, part of the process, materials that have names that we can look up, like high-impact polystyrene, and see what it's made of, if it's recyclable, etc., are becoming MakerBot dissolvable filament. So it has a brand name like, you know, HP printer and HP ink, or Nespresso, and it has a title that is attributes and not a name that we can follow. But on the other hand, there's also different initiatives. There are initiatives like the Washington University's initiatives to offer recipes for making materials at home, to make us more knowledgeable about what we use in 3D printers. There are weird images like these, where you think about the 3D printer and the potential it holds, and the fact that the industry is evolving to a place where there's just a factory, a huge space in the US that, with 1 million printers, and the whole idea of distribution, local production, etc., completely disappears into this just robotic factory. But then on the other hand, you have this other notion of home production and the questions it brings in terms of regulation, copyright. Like you heard of the printed gun, this is a very famous design piece. And there are companies that use their time to acquire everything, every single company that comes out, so they can control the whole production chain, from materials to printers to service providers, etc. So the industry would be owned by, now it's owned by about 3 companies. But there are other initiatives, like the Perpetual Plastic Project, that imagine ideas that bypass these systems and say, you buy the material, you print, you shred, you make new material, you print again, or you can do it from plastic cups, etc. So it's still in flux, and it's still kind of a tug of war between big companies and small, let's say, more social initiatives. And the future, and that's maybe part of the question, the future is not set, so we can still influence it. I think when we look at how we handle this new technology, we have to ask ourselves 3 questions. How it's communicated, so does it create an active or passive consumer? Does it give us more or less knowledge? How it's regulated, is it centralized? Because those big factories are easily regulated, easily controllable in what they produce and who gets money from it. Or is it really decentralized like the social promise it has? And is it closed or open systems? Does it monopolize it around a few companies, or does it open up to different initiatives? And if you know, this is Milton Friedman. He won the Nobel Prize of Economics, and he has a very good story about a pencil. He says, this pencil, it couldn't be done without people in Brazil chopping the wood, and people in wherever getting the metal, and people somewhere else getting the what's the word for the thing in a pencil? Which rights? Anyway, that this is actually, this small pencil is actually an operation of thousands and thousands of people working together to make this one product. I think it's interesting also to think about the designer in that sense. Design is a person that's really in the center of a system. He is talking to marketers, producers, money people, and public audience, and he has this unique quality of taking those big ideas, these big processes, and simplifying it and making it an emotional decision for you to buy them or not. So we have a big role in how these applications for the 3D printer would unravel. And we have to remember that the 3D printer is just a technology. The Apple II did make Steve Jobs a millionaire, but what made him a billionaire was VisiCalc, which was a software developed by 2 guys in a university, which was the first Excel sheet. And when people in Wall Street saw it, they said, what this thing does in an hour, I do in a week. So when the applications are good enough, what's called today a killer app, then the technology is worth utilizing. And the applications are up to us. So the future is not set, but I think designers, but also, of course, regulators, businessmen, etc., they can define the future of this technology, and they have to define it based on principles that they believe in, I think. And for me, as I said before, those 3 questions of regulation, communication, and value and finance are the key questions to see if something for this machine is good enough or not. Thank you.
Hello again, or hello, welcome to the new visitors. We had just now 2 very exciting keynotes by designers Jan de Costa and Todd Ellis. who both are showing projects in our currently still on show Hello Robot, Design Between Human and Machine. And I want to welcome on stage also two designers from Vienna who have a project in the Hello Robot exhibition, Mia Meusberger and Johanna Pichelbauer, and our very own philosopher and part of the Vienna Biennale Circle, Mark Köckelberg, currently at the University of Vienna. Welcome you all, and I would like to start actually by not introducing the designers, but giving them the opportunity to speak a little bit about their backgrounds and their current fields of research and the project maybe that's on view in the show. And we are going then to try to make the connection between how is the relation between human and machine, or humans and object, established through design, through the mediation of technology. What role does empathy play? How much more empathy can we have for objects depending on how they are produced? And yeah, that's going to be exciting. So please, I would like to start maybe in the order of seating.
Okay. So hello, my name is Jan de Koster. I'm a robot designer from Belgium. I have a small design studio there. So my work is mainly about robot character design, so their background story and their place in our daily life is the most important part for my robots. Their function, their purpose is mostly the least important part. I have a robot here in the exhibition that is called Robin. She's a really small blue robot that's sitting when you enter the first hall on the left. So.
I'm Todd Ellis. I'm a designer, design researcher and curator from Israel. Today I do a lot of exhibition design, but continuing research projects. And for the past 2 years, I've also been the chief curator of Jerusalem Design Week, which is a very curated event taking place in Jerusalem. And this year we are starting the new topic of conservatism and conservation.
Hello, I'm Mark Köckelberg. I'm a philosopher of technology here at the University of Vienna. So I think about new technologies, try to understand them and evaluate them, especially digital technologies, robots, artificial intelligence, these kind of technologies. And so for that purpose I use concepts, but I also like to collaborate with people who develop the technologies, with engineers and with artists and curators, actually, also to try different ways of different perspectives of looking at these issues. Yeah.
Hi. Okay, my name is Mia Meusberger. I'm an industrial design student here at University of Applied Arts Vienna. And I, in my work and in my projects, mostly focus on speculative future scenarios and emotional explorations. And I try to really work transdisciplinary, so with photography, video and sound, model building, and mostly storytelling. Yeah.
I'm Johanna Pichelbauer. I first studied at University of Technology in Vienna. I studied mechanical engineering, so I learned how the machines work, and then I wanted to look beyond that and started my studies at University of Applied Arts, also industrial design, where we also look at the relationships of machines and humans and new fields of technology emerging, and try to imagine what they might look and feel like in the future. Our project, the project with which we're here, is called Summer Scouts. So it's all around the smart city. And when we're approaching the smart city, we tend to focus on, we tend to look at what we can measure, and then, sorry.
Did you lose a thread? Okay. So basically in the project we talked about the future of smart cities and how they often just try to optimize our routes, make us more efficient and more productive. And then we found out, okay, actually that's not the kind of smart cities we want to live in. We want to have a city that's really habitable for us, that is emotionally involving and enjoyable. So we decided to try and find out how technology can help us with that.
Yeah, so it's often the things that are more difficult to measure that are actually important for us if we want to live in a future that's about our emotional well-being. And so we're trying to find ways of measuring those things, and we came up with these 7 sensors that measure when summer has come to Vienna, because it's this communal feeling of motivation, and it's not an individual psychological event, but it's something that all of us citizens feel, and we wanted to find a way of measuring that, and that's what we did in our project.
Thank you for these small introductions. So as you can see, the theme is called Artificial Intelligent Genuine Emotions. So even if our counterparts are not yet able to have their emotions on their own, we always are kind of emotionally involved or attached to our things, even if they are not smart. There's also a little exhibition that I want to point out that I co-curate with my colleague Janina Falk now, is also here. That's called Ich weiß nichts, on growing relations between things, also still on view today and tomorrow. And as a contrast to Hello Robot, which is more about societal changes through technology, this show focuses on things. And in this talk right now, we will also try to make the bridge between a thing, as the philosopher Peter Paul Verbeek says in What Things Do, our world is always mediated by our engagement with things. As we see, we sit now on chairs, we are here on a stage in a building, so we are influenced by these settings. But smart technologies or robots or sentient beings, if you want, or even maybe conscious beings in the future, will shape our societies and our relationships very, very differently. And I wanted to start with the first round of questions, like how do the means of production or the characterization of objects, so if we heard of Jan de Costa, he gives character to his things, even if they're maybe not functional. And Todd Ellis worked with a project that uses 3D printing and talks about also a future where maybe we can have things that we can be even more attached to because we didn't buy it in a store where everyone else can buy the very same thing, but we can have our individual objects that can come more close to us maybe. Or in the sense of the project of Mia and Johanna, we can measure the quality of life not by parameters that are usually used for measuring this, but bringing emotion also into science, which is interesting. And to Mark, specifically also the question of maybe trust or morals or ethics, what is that in relation to those smart objects and technologies? And yeah, who wants to start to give a standpoint of their opinion on this?
I'll start.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we have in the exhibition Hello Robot, you have a Sony Aibo robot dog, which is a really cool machine, but it's also out of production for many, many years already. It's produced by Sony, and obviously Sony makes a lot of other products, and at a certain moment they didn't see the point anymore of continuing the production of this, but still people own this robot dog, and for many people there is a large emotional connection with their Aibo robots. So mainly in Asia, there are a lot of clubs now with people who own Aibo robots that help each other, keeping their robots alive. And I think that was a really important precedent for many other robots that are being produced right now, that are being perceived by their producers as a mass product, as an IT product. I'm thinking about SoftBank, of course, with their Pepper right now, which is it's a driving iPad, but has not so many characteristics that give it personality, and that's absolutely no priority for this company. Every time I see sales representatives at fairs, I try to tease them with these questions. Can I give it a different color? Can I give it a different hairdo? And they get really nervous, and I know what their answers are going to be. This is a product, a mass-produced product, and if it breaks down, you're supposed to buy a new pepper. Even you're renting the pepper, and they provide you with a new machine if yours breaks down, and then they download your software and they upload it in the new pepper. So how do you match this with social interaction like we do with other people all around us? If your boyfriend or girlfriend breaks down, are you supposed to download their software and then upload it in the fresh, new, generated boyfriend or girlfriend? And these questions make people from SoftBank nervous, and you get stuck at a certain point, and they cannot continue, cannot see further into the future with this. And now my work is all about looking past that point and seeing as far in the future as I can. And that's interesting that they're so big right now and that they're flooding the market with these products, and I hope more people will be critical about them.
So we could basically have more attachment to our objects if they are not created through obsolescence means, but they could be more customized or more made our own.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of workshops, of course. So many people, creative people, and also kids. There were some kids here today making small robots. They make robots in my class, and then the first thing I explained to them is that you have to give it a name. That's really important. And if we go home later, you have a responsibility now. This is your robot. You have to take care of it. And some of them don't take it serious and they go whatever. And then many take it really serious. And that's the first step for me to an emancipation of these robots in our society. If you can convince these small children or young people that this is an option, that this is okay to do, then there is hope.
That's a good cue point maybe to Mark and then Johanna about responsibility for our objects, for the things that we create. Even if sometimes they get a life of their own, there's still, it's in our responsibility. Maybe you can say something.
Yes. So first of all, I would like to ask, why is it? Why should we give a personality to these robots? Yeah? Why do we want to interact with machines in this personal way? So I'm interested in people's answers to that. But in general, of course, it's quite a natural way for us to do things. We ascribe personality. We also connect narratives to robots, and so I think people in the world of technology, they cannot avoid, I think, creating a certain narrative and creating a certain appearance. And some of them are aware of that, and some of them are not sufficiently aware of it, I think. And so I think then one can ask critically what kind of narrative and what kind of personalities and what kind of stories should we connect to the objects. And one critical question could be then, do we need, for example, sex robots? Do we want that kind of story narrative to enact that also? So these are critical questions then one should ask about the technologies.
Yeah, I had a very similar remark. So I guess if we think of machines as even a little bit human, and if we feel responsible for them, that also then we don't really understand their nature anymore, and that makes it very dangerous because they're still programmable, and it's about what the creators intentions are with these robots. And I think, I'm not sure if we as designers should really aim for a very humanoid version of robots.
May I? I think if I think about robots and technology in general and human emotion, most of the time it really comes to my mind that people are just scared of progress and new technologies. And then the answer for that for me and myself would be that we're scared because we don't understand it. And I think in this case, it's especially what you said, that narratives can help us understand what's coming. So if we create robots that have characteristics, that have personality, that's something that we humans are kind of familiar with. We're used to personalities, we're used to other humans, so it's an easy or like a learning process for us to ascribe certain values and behaviors and attitudes towards machines. And that's something we even do with unintelligent objects. I mean, how many of us have already seen faces in cars or ascribed gender or personalities to our objects and machines? How often do we complain about our washing machines eating our socks for fun? So I think that's kind of a dealing process and learning process of how we do deal with new technologies. And I think that the role of the designer could also be to try, with form and function, try to enhance that understanding and learning process.
I would absolutely agree, and what we also try to convey in the exhibition Hello Robot is that apart from the first room where we encounter actual humanoid-looking anthropomorph robots, like for example Robin, in the course of the exhibition we can see that the robot as a term can take any shape, so it must not look like a human and can still have personality. There's, for example, an object called Kip, the empathy robot. It looks more like a lamp, like the Pixar's lamps. And it's more about how it makes you feel or interact, and it must not be the humanoid image that must be furthered in robotic design, for example. It can be, must not. And interestingly enough, exactly the question of how we are scared, and on the other hand, at the same time, attached to those things. And how can we get rid of this scare and make use of our responsibility for creating technology in the first place that helps society, for example, also to further the commons. There's also a statement by our director, Christoph Thun Hohenstein, made available also in a little brochure for free, that states new robot laws, following the robot laws of Asimov, but conveyed to a new time, and asking about how means of production and ethics of the society should influence the concepts of new technologies. Maybe Tal wants to step in on that note.
Yeah, I'm not under the robot hat, but I do think that the robot that we call 3D printer has a lot to do with the way we attach ourselves to objects, as you mentioned. And I think we tend to think of terms like sustainability today, either in very technological terms, let's say something that can last, so it's something against this planned obsolescence, or ecology, so it's using things, using resources without depleting them. But I think a lot of the way we are sustainable with objects is the relationships that we build with them. I did a project once about shoes, and in Israel it's a good story, shoes, because Israel started, there was an austerity period, so you get those coupons for shoes, and people would cut the front of the shoe so it would last another half a size for kids. And then there was a boycott, so if you got shoes from America, that was great, and you would never throw them away. And of course, today this attachment is, and it's always something that, that marketing tries to deal with, so it's a point of, if it's expensive, then you would keep it, or if it's something that's one-off or kind of scarcity would make you keep it. But I imagine these shoes that actually change over time of use, and this idea that you have an experience with a product also makes you keep it. And we know it from shoes, but we also know it when we look at production. So everybody who's ever taken a ceramics course in his life still probably keeps half of the shitty vases he made, because it's something that you made. And I think when you think, but it usually, sustainability is at the back end, so it's what was done, how it was done, what's the story behind it. But when you think about it, entering our lives in the process of design, of production, manufacturing, etc., then we can build a relationship with products that might make us keep it. So this is a different type of sustainability, even though it's plastic and it still can last.
More like emotional sustainability, maybe.
Yeah.
Or as I read, cultural sustainability, or culturally durable objects, which I find a very interesting cue, also thinking about our next Vienna Biennale. So there's a quote that I wanted to tell you. The Italian designer Iso Mancini said, "It is time for a new generation of products which can age slowly and in a dignified way, which can become our partners in life and can support our memories." And he also says that designers should be guided by the image of objects that are more like plants in a garden, that you tend to, and then you get something back from them. And I thought it's an interesting, very romantic notion, but maybe that can also be a key word for the next question that I wanted to ask you, what the responsibility of the designer or also the philosopher or curator is in regards to conveying the relevance of caring for objects, of caring for relationships.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I would like to relate it to one of the objects in the Hello Robot exhibition, where there is this kind of remains of a robot in under glass.
It's called the waste.
Yes, the waste, and I think it's a interesting object because it makes us think about how we should deal with these robots when it's the end of their life, so to speak. Shall we mourn for them? How shall we deal with that? Can we just get a new one? And also vice versa. What about human lives when they end? Is this different? And if so, how can we deal with that with the new technologies? That we now already have these profiles on Facebook of deceased people, for example. So the technology will change these things, and yeah, we have to question how to deal with these objects when they're broken, and if then designers should rather design for a kind of mortality of the object, or instead try to make it very durable for sustainability reasons, for example. So, but maybe the two can combine. So it's a very interesting question, I think.
Yeah, there's in architecture, there's this phenomenon that some architects think about the afterlife of their building, how it will look like as a ruin. And I thought always it's an interesting notion and wanted to ask you guys also if anyone if that's relevant for your design process to think about the afterlife of the project once it's over, or once it's not, if it's something that's related to a specific time. How will people view that project in 2065, or yeah, what will it look like? For example, Robin or Rachel.
Yeah, that's something I'm really conscious about. I'm really aware of what their lifetime will look like. Of course, I'm not thinking about the end of their life, and I don't like to think about that. And that's common with how we perceive other persons around us. I see that I perceive their lifespan as something that is very similar to biological life around us, and that's not because I'm around robots too much and I'm a little bit subjective about that. The robot characters that are living in our house, they're always there. Like if you have a character in a book or in a film, the character is alive in some abstract form, and you read the book and then you read about the character, you close the book, the character is gone. But these characters, they're always there.
There's actual material involved, right?
Yeah, Robin is now traveling the world, and she'll come back in 5 years, I think, and then we will see that she has lived 5 years in other places, and she has scratches and things have broken and have been repaired. And that is a part of their personality then. They're not brand new anymore, but every dent, scratch in there shows that they have had cool adventures. With Robin, it's obvious. With Rachel, it's a lot more obvious. She has been a lot more around the world, and there are other robots. In the beginning, I was nervous about it. Even Yami, the first robot I made, he had scratches before he even was delivered to the client, and I was nervous about it, and the client said, that's okay, that makes him look real. Pixar has to do a lot of effort to make it look that real, and with you, it's just happening by itself. And that meant a lot for me, and that's what I've been paying attention to a lot now. So yeah, that is something a designer can either allow or just disapprove, like what we see with the more shiny white robots I talked about earlier.
yeah, on the cue of realness and speculative design, maybe.
Kind of. Well, I think with robots and most machines that are being built today, it's not so static. So it's not that we give them an algorithm, like that we design an algorithm and then it will just stay like that and age. But I think they will get updates and then change and maybe change to something that we couldn't have seen before. And there is a certain danger in that with neural networks and things getting out of control when we start to not understand anymore, not understand the language anymore. But I think it's also a chance that we can reprogram and learn from our mistakes in a way.
I guess I'm somehow on the same point there, that actually our job will constantly be to reevaluate what we're building and why we're building it and if it still works and how it should be done in the future. And I guess that's also a point we're always trying to make with our projects, because speculative design is basically always thinking about the future and trying to bring it to the now, trying to somehow reach an either very favorable future or to avoid a very unfavorable future. And I guess that's also something we tried with our summer scouts, because basically those sensors that we created could have just been the little sensors they are. But the thing is that the technology itself doesn't really communicate what its potential is. So if I give you a small light sensor and light sensitivity sensor, you probably look at it and you might know what it should do, but it doesn't really communicate how it does it.
Yeah, so you need to interface design to convey that.
Basically. So we really do have to, design interfaces for future technologies. And I guess that's something we quite managed to do. And while we kind of tried to get closer to it, suddenly that's something that became very, very apparent for us, is that the object suddenly developed personalities for us. Suddenly we had favorites, suddenly we thought they were cute, and suddenly everything became very, very playful and approachable for people, and they were not that afraid of technology anymore. So.
Can I have a comment on that? I think you made a good point about the fact that we are losing control with about AI systems and software that is being developed by the autonomous machine by itself. That is exactly the reason why we need good personality in these robots. So at least that part of if the robot perceives the world around it and everybody is hostile towards it, of course, that will be the first reaction the robot has to the people surrounding him. If he's a nice, friendly robot, everybody likes him, respects the robot or the software, and sees it as something that has good intentions. Then, of course, the robot will develop in that sense. At some point, not far in the future, a robot psychologist will be a real job, in my opinion.
But you could trick people by using robots that seem very friendly to do things that are not so friendly.
There's also some projects that do that in the show. For example, Alex Rabin's Blab Droid, who tricks you by its cuteness into telling him all its secrets, which he streams live on YouTube while you're talking to him. So that's not really nice and a good intention.
That makes me think, like, should designers be transparent about what a robot is, or should they create these illusions that it's whatever the illusion is, that it's a person or that it's good or that it's evil, whereas it's not evil, that's also possible. So should designer be transparent, or is the designer a kind of magician who can create these illusions and that's totally fine?
I think it's not only about the designer, but most of the time these designs are contracted by large corporations. And then the question we have in the show, do you trust robots? We always said, like, it's not a question of the trust in the robots, but in who is behind it and which agenda is followed. And mostly it's a for-profit agenda, and then you can't have this discussion.
These questions already, of course, exist. I mean, online, constantly we share our information on Facebook and it goes for profit.
The invisible laborers, basically, for Mark Zuckerberg.
Or a recapture that we translate or we digitize books. So I think these are mechanisms that can serve different purposes as who's ever financing it see fit. But we do have examples in both ways. So also when you speak about robots that pretend to be cute, but they're not, there's also people like that.
Absolutely.
A lot of them. And I think that's it's a good point in terms of what the difference is that the robots probably don't serve their own agendas, but they serve someone else's agendas. But the tools and mechanisms are the same, and we are already facing them all the time.
But, sorry. I think the scale is completely different. So I'm not talking about a cute robot. I'm talking about a Snapchat filter, for example, that's really cute and makes me look really cute and talk really cute, but then it collects my data. And it
tricks you into giving up face recognition
yes,
data
and at a huge
as a
scale
game.
that
Yeah.
a single person couldn't do.
So, but isn't then the danger that the designer is just an instrument of this profit-making industry, or can a designer play a different role?
That's a very good question.
I think it's in this relationship that the true potential of a designer relies. It's always a servant of the system, because designer is not an autonomous being. He's always working, or at least traditionally, he's always serving a client. But your ability as a designer to, let's say, transform the brief or inject it with positive, or to say no to a brief, that's also possible, is exactly our potential, because then you can also reach millions of people as an industrial designer or interface designer, whatever. Let's say, unlike different disciplines. So, but it's always from within the system that you can kind of slowly change it. It's for stricter people.
Trojan horse.
Well, from my experience, of course, I've been making robots now for 5 years, and I'm still a one-man studio. So maybe I should listen to the clients more, but I'm always making the robots that I want to make. And that is a decision I made when I started doing this work. So I'm making my robots, and if clients like these robots, then they'll come to me and they'll ask me to make more of these robots. But that is the way that I work, and if a client would ask me, they will probably never come to me for these questions, to make a robot that doesn't fit my style of project, so that is not ethically correct, then I'll probably say no, or try to convince them that there are better ways to do this. But maybe that's also because I'm more a robot artist than purely the designer, and I'm perceiving all these projects as a work of art and not purely something that will be mass-produced. There is never a robot that is mass-produced from designs that I've made. So from that standpoint, I hope more people would work the way I do, and maybe that is combined to the technology, the ideas you have presented, the future for many other projects or products, not just robots, but any other product that is useful in our society.
But that is also, I think, part of the relationship I'm talking about, because once you get to a client like Audi and you are able to convince them to do it your way, then you are working with the system to improve it, if in your perspective. But it's still working. It's not an outside kind of revolutionary cut. It's always kind of trying to push the industry to better directions or to your specific agenda.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, nobody in the consortium or Audi needed a face on this robot. So if I wasn't in the room, then there would have been a face on this robot. It's just, that's the only thing I was useful there, to convince these people that this was a good idea. And of course, being a name like Audi and all these partners involved is something very useful for me to convince people that this is a serious business and not just a crazy guy in his garage tinkering on robots. Yeah. I'm convincing that, yeah.
Yeah, this is also an interesting keyword, as the Vienna Biennale 2017 is titled Robots, Work, Our Future. We had a lot of discussions and still will have on the future of human labor and work. And this is also something for me tied to emotion in a way, because work nowadays, even if it's the so-called Erwerbsarbeit, the work to get your money for living, you still have some kind of attachment to it and to your co-workers, or you like what you do, or you hate it, but still that's an emotion. And in a future where robots will take on our tasks, how can we deal with that? How will it change our relationship with the thing? And I thought this example very interesting. Like you mentioned, there's this robot, it does not need a face, but the face is only one example to make it in a way that people feel still they have the dignity in interacting with it, and they don't feel like a machine operator or like a slave to the machine. Or that's also a question that interests me always to ask people. I asked Bruce Sterling and Douglas Couplet also about it. Who is the slave and who is the master, man or machine? I would like to pass that question also around. And also this, the question of how can we work together with technology and still keep our humanity, and maybe by inscribing also some human and ethical ideas into the technology by programming it. Still, there's the problem of self-learning mechanisms who can go rogue, but can we, or should there be a limitation for designers, for manufacturers, for producers to have this inscribed in technology?
May I?
Yeah.
If you ask, like, how will we deal with it, I actually think that we have to deal with it now, because if autonomous machines and AI is there, then already it has inscribed values that we should have talked about and reevaluated.
Now or never, yeah.
Yeah, it's now or never. So I guess we're now in a very, very interesting and specific phase of where we actually have to define how the ethics of robotics and AI should work in the next few years. And I mean, since we're the creators of those robots, for example, we can never really keep ourselves or our values from the creation. So I think we're in this very interesting spot that we first have to reevaluate our own characteristics and our own ethics and our own attitudes towards everything, towards each other, and then also like how the technology should interact with us and like have an attitude towards us. So I guess there's not only the role of the designer in like a profit-oriented context, working for companies that already produce those machines and those things, but also in the educational part, like making projects that spark interest in the public, make them discuss about, like make them think about all those topics, because it's our society that will live with the technology, it's our society that will live with the robots. So we should feel comfortable and we should discuss and decide now what we want to have, because otherwise it's going to be the companies, and then it's going to be the Snapchat filters that collect our faces, then it's going to be the cute robot that shares our secrets on YouTube. And it's necessary to have those scary scenarios now, and it's necessary to have very optimistic scenarios, but it's mostly just trying to figure out like what we want, who we are, and how we want to live, and then just trying to get there. And
I don't think it's first we sit down and then discuss this and then it develops. I think it's this super messy time we're in, where those things that we're afraid of are already here, and some consequences of it we just can't see yet. A lot of algorithms are black boxes, and companies are very intransparent. So I'm not sure if we can catch up, actually. And it's this, I mean, right now everything that can be done is done if it can be sold. And I'm not sure if in this political environment I don't think we can sit down and discuss ethics.
No,
I think it's a good point you made, that the technology already, that all the values and the problems of society are already reflected in that and flow into that. And that's why technology can also have this role of in a way, making us critical, making us question the things that are there, like with the sex robots,
look in the mirror, right?
Yeah. For example, gender issues that are problematic in our society, they get reflected in those problems with robots. So that's, I think, an opportunity also to think about those problems.
Also, what I wanted to say was not that we can discuss now and act later, but it's a constant progress, and we will definitely make mistakes, because it's actually trial and error is pretty human. But the thing is that technology itself is not the cause of problems most often. It's actually just an amplifier. It mostly just supports flaws we already have, and it supports good stuff we already have. So we should try to bring out the best in humans with technology and not, as a designer, encourage people to do stupid stuff, because there's actually this famous quote Johanna always tells me, is that technology is only the thing, or only as smart as the most stupid person handles it. And that actually quite puts it to the point, I guess. So design should be about education.
I think technology has had a long history with struggle, and it's always, and it's a constant kind of social struggle that goes through channels of technology, whether for better and for worse, whether people utilize it to profit or to make good. And it's part of kind of, let's say, our cultural evolution. And I think, or social political evolution. And there's a very famous book that surveys kind of the history of mankind. And one of its key points there at the beginning is that we tend to think that man has tamed wheat. You know that probably, while wheat has tamed man. That for wheat, evolutionary speaking, this was the best thing it could do, was that man would take it and grow it, and it exponentially grew since it was first collected by the early man. So I think, while kind of evolution can't maybe catch up with culture, the cultural evolution of this robots is, I think, technically that it wants to expand. So it will use us, I guess, to a certain point to expand, and we would have to build a relationship, a bit enslaved and a bit using it.
Well, there is a thought experiment that I often play around with in my mind. Imagine that by some cataclysmic event, the whole of the Earth would disappear right now, what would be left of human culture? So there are two Voyager spaceships that are leaving the solar system, and there are a couple of Martian rovers, and that is probably, yeah, and some satellites on other celestial bodies, but that is all that is left then. So that is something I'm very aware of if you think about the future of my robots and how far they will carry on into the future. So if we want to make sure that our culture, everything, this couldn't be a more obvious place to talk about culture than the building we're in right now. What would you want to be left of our culture in 1,000 years, maybe 2,000 years? I'm not convinced that there will be human beings around in 5 or 10,000 years, but there will be robots. And then I'll just wander around in my mind thinking about what is this robot doing, what are they talking about, and how nice will this be? Will they talk about cool cultural things and how nice ideas humans had in the past when they were still around? This is something that the consequences for that, it is something we have to think about today. That's not something we have to consider in a few hundred years when it's too late. This is something that is part of this robot emancipation when robots are taking their place in our society today. That's something that started, has to start from the beginning.
But then I have a question. Like, it sounds like you would think that the purpose of humanity is to kind of give our values to the next generation of beings on Earth, and that probably in 5,000 years we're not around. So, I mean, like most of the discussion about AI right now is that it should be human-centered, so it's easier for us to have the transition so that we can live together with them, that they benefit us, that they serve us as partners, as social, interactive partnership or something. But if we view it from the point that this is the next big thing and this is our purpose as a species, to create those robots, and this is AI, wouldn't you say that if we orient them just on us, on our human features, that we kind of restrict the possibilities of AI?
Yeah. I wouldn't limit them to our features, but at least give them our values and inspire them to do great things like many artists and people are doing today here on Earth. So at least they'll need these possibilities. I hope when a robot society or we'll not continue to, we will probably not continue to use the word robot in the future, but right now it's the most understandable word, but it's still a slave word for a robot. So it will need other names for that. But with these artificial life forms, when they're living all over the planet and maybe on other planets too, I hope they'll develop themselves and they will make things that are even cooler and nicer than we will be able to, because they don't have these constrictions of biology. But that doesn't mean they will have to be created by our image. They can be very abstract and develop their own.
Yeah, I agree that we should explore these new possibilities and that it doesn't have to be in our image. But at the same time, I would say, why focus so much on emancipation of robots? Shouldn't we focus on the emancipation of humans and human societies? Of course, understood as humans always in collaboration with the machines and the robots, because I think there's a lot of work to be done there, and sometimes these science fiction ideas can also distract from the issues that are now quite urgent for us.
Yeah, I would agree on that, because I was reading a lot about dystopian science fiction in preparation of the Vienna Biennale to get a glimpse of what could be the worst case scenario. And if you think about it, most of them are actually not likely, even though people tend to say they are. Even dystopias that depict a very totally controlled society, which we are now basically having, it's not the case that we can limit we don't tend to let ourselves be limited in that way, and still we can influence it. So we are in the dystopian novels, it's mostly already there, so the system is there. We are now in this very interesting phase, as we like to say, what a time to be alive. We can now still influence the direction in which it's going. And in this regard, I wanted to point out, because we talked about what do we want, there's a manifesto upstairs around, designed by Bureau Bauer and established with our Vienna Biennale circle. And we asked these questions: what do we want for our planet? What do we want for our humanity? How do we want to live? And it seems very naive and basic questions on the first sight, but as we learned in our manifold discussions, they're not easy to answer. There's 6,000 different answers of the people involved on our websites, but we came to the conclusion that we should use we should do what we can to use technology in favor of keeping the planet and humans around, and not having the scenario you described, which is also really interesting, obviously, to have humans are gone and then the culture is preserved by our machines, by our proxies, can also happen, but it must not. Because some AI researchers recently say that, for example, Robert Trapel, one of the pioneers in Austria, said that humans might live to the age of 200, 300 years in the future. And it seems likely, as we have doubled and tripled our lifespans in the course of the past centuries. So that seems eligible in the terms of new medical possibilities and also technologies. The question is, what do we do when we live now 200 or 300 years instead of 80 to 100? There must be a deeper purpose, and we really have to take it in our hands. How do you see that?
I'm just wondering, aren't we skipping the question of singularity and kind of the merger between man and technology? Because
transhumanist.
Yeah, because we are always kind of, but of course, and that's no news, that we are already kind of quite robotic in many ways. I think if you look at it on an evolutionary scale, our purpose is just to survive and continue as much as we can. And then all these questions about how you deal with humans, how do you deal with the environment, how you deal with animals, we always are very humanistic, although the world is becoming a bit less humanistic than it was 50 years ago. So if you look at kind of extreme veganism that is completely non-humanistic, or you look at kind of radical religionism, whatever the word is, which is completely non-humanistic, but basically the purpose is kind of survival. And then you say survival, somewhere it was written, what is human? So, is it my legs? So I think we kind of just talk about these parallel levels where probably it's somewhere in the middle, this kind of merger, whether it's one body or a series of bodies.
I think what I find really interesting is also this discussion of where we would accept robots to take over our jobs, and where we think that this human, flawed, irrational nature is still important. Like if you look at the soccer field, where people are not ready at all to give up the referee as just a dictator of the rules. They don't even accept the TV or video proof. Not even
It's much
talking
nicer
about
to
a robotic
talk
judge.
about him afterwards. That idiot, what did he do?
Yeah, so I think in a lot of fields where we would expect machines to be more precise, we're still not cool with giving up our humanness or flawed way of doing
We embrace
things.
our imperfection, which I personally find great.
It wasn't a question. I just think it's very interesting.
Thank you for that remark. I think it was important.
Yes, because that's sometimes with the robots, they're as far as I know, the ones that we have now, they're pretty predictable still, and pretty one-dimensional, I would say, and limited in what they can do, and so they show us that we are so much more complex and rich creatures, and of course with our faults and flaws and vulnerabilities. But yeah, I think we don't need the humanism anymore that puts us at the center of the universe, because we had Darwin, Freud, and today we have this new revolution. But we need still a kind of humanism in the sense that we need to keep the values, and we need to, I think, value also some of these imperfections, perhaps.
I guess there's like still this clash of, we're now basically writing a narrative, and the question now is the narrative about us or is it about them? And I guess from the point now, it's still about us, but I think there won't be a point where we just suddenly say, oh, it's about them, because they will become us, basically. I guess the transition will be very fluent, because there are already cyborgs existing. There are already people who can only see because they have implants. There are people who can already hear or can only walk because of that. And I guess if we live up to 200 or 300 years, we will probably not do this only biological. So I guess we just have to try to figure out along the way what's the next thing to do. And if we come to the point that there's no humans anymore, then it will still be a human-based society, basically. So.
But then I just don't care anymore. I mean, honestly, I don't really care about the time after humans. I found it really strange for you, to hear you talk about the importance of keeping human values for the time after us. It's a strange thought to me.
Just to make clear, it's not just purely about survival. It's not just we have to carry on. The last human value has to be around in 30,000 years. I think it's important that the beings that are around here still have the same motivations and the same things that make life worth living. And that is, for me, discovering beauty in life and enjoying that form of nature that is around at that moment. So enjoying themselves and being grateful that they're alive. If we can accomplish that in probably the artificial life forms that are around at that moment, then I would be very happy, and then my life had meaning at this moment, you see? So it's not purely they're still around, but also they're enjoying their life. If Rachel or Robin are sitting in a field between flowers in 8,000 years, and they're saying, this is nice here, it's a nice Sunday, the weather is nice. That is not purely, we're still around, the nuclear fallout is okay today. That's not enough, you see.
But maybe they hate that. Maybe they hate sitting in a field. I mean, how do you know what feels good for a robot? I mean, it's a very human thing to say, I want them to have joy, or to define what joy is for a different species in a way.
But I think what could be done is to define or ask ourselves what quality of life means. And certainly now in our time and in the coming future, which things do we really need for this quality of life? And I don't mean like luxury or just a good life, as we like to call it. And how can we use technology as a device for that rather than a tool, maybe? That's an interesting differentiation that I would also like to tackle as a last round. The device is also something that's a plan or a method more, a strategy, rather than the tool that has shaped humanity in the past, the tool as a Werkzeug. Maybe the device is the new notion that we should be talking about when implementing technology to improve quality of life for many humans at the same time, not just one corporation or one person.
Yes, but the advantage of the tool was still that it was very much connected to what you do very bodily. It's connected with your work, for example. And the devices we have now, there's a kind of distance. They are the mass-produced objects, or they are somewhere there is an algorithm in the cloud, so to speak, that does things, and it's behind the screen, and I don't know much about it. So I think it's unavoidable now that we have these things, but we have to think about, okay, how can they contribute to the good life? Because it might be that we feel a bit alienated from them, whereas the Werkzeug, the hammer, for example, it's closely linked to us.
I totally see what you mean, and that's exactly why I would like to challenge that idea to how can we become close to our device, and how can the devices become not what you say is something that we don't understand, that we have to feel distant about, but if we create them and develop them, maybe we can establish that relationship in a meaningful way.
It's a bit of a chicken and egg thing, because
I know, I like those things.
Quality of life, of course, is a very transformative term, right?
It's never the same. Yeah? It's always a process, and it's different.
Through time, through space, through culture.
Absolutely.
And you are also a bit of a slave to it. So now I feel like my phone is dead and my quality of life is ruined. But 20 years ago, I didn't care. So it's a very weird, I think it's kind of a weird notion to even think about these things as improving our quality of life. I think we can talk about some things that are malfunctioning in society. So certain cultures that are dying or starving or disappearing. The same questions for 3,000 years, starvation, disease, death, wars, inequality.
I'm quite certain they will stick around for another 3,000.
Yes, forever and ever. But that's what I mean. It's like there's no end point. There's only a way, and the way is a kind of a constant struggle between those notions. And technology is kind of, this kind of race, like Cold War-ish kind of notion that things are constantly tilting the scale one way or the other. But I think it's really not a question of quality of life. What we can talk about, and what is being talked about quite a lot now, is the point of dependency and the way we are dependent on these certain things. So it's kind of a question maybe of, let's say, autonomy or freedom that is kind of disappearing as we lay our dependency on these little helpers.
Those are big words, though.
Yes.
Philosophy has tackled the question of the freedom of the will since centuries. I'm not sure we can discuss that right now, but I agree with you, obviously. And I think what I meant also is this kind of the emotional stability, maybe, or mental sanity. That's also tied to quality of life, at least for me. That how can we keep it in a world that's becoming increasingly stressful?
Yeah, there I wouldn't say that. I mean, I agree that the human being itself is a kind of transformative project, but there are some things that remain
the same.
More or less the same. There are some things in our biology that gives us certain needs and so on, and I think the way we use the technologies nowadays could very well be not so beneficial for our health in general. Mental health, bodily health is connected.
We see it with the overuse of online media or a digital device.
It's not
that we
only
sleep
in
next
certain
to.
cases of addiction, but maybe in the daily use that we maybe need different technologies. So I wouldn't say that therefore we need to stop
no, I don't say
technology,
that.
but we need different technologies that could contribute to that quality of life and respond to the needs that we have. Of course, we will always have to relate to those needs, and it's not like a total given, but we cannot just do with our bodies whatever we want, I think.
But isn't there like, there's this story, these stories, when we were young, we would go out to the street and play, but now it's not safe, etc., etc. But we still need to socialize, so technologies help us socialize. When we were young, there was not so many cars, but then, so I think these are also kind of, these technologies that are always kind of pushing us a bit ahead, but we are also getting older, and and certain technologies that have very positively affected our lives have not been accepted so well by the generation before.
So that's a stable thing, right? We have this social need. It's very strong. It's very important for us as humans. And the question is, how do we deal with that? How do we satisfy this need, and how do we shape that? And I think, yeah, the so-called social technologies we have today, maybe they're not social enough, or not social in the right way. And so new technologies, if designed differently, they could contribute to this need in a better way.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that, because I don't know, I think one of the best examples for how technology can improve our lives is actually the phone. And then it's also one of the worst examples of how technology can really influence us in a bad way. But like I said before, I think technology is an amplifier. So on the one hand, in a personal experience, one of my best friends comes from America. We text every day. We have a very close relationship, closer than with many people I have, like in a geographically close distance. But then on the other hand, if I have to concentrate, and even if my phone is on silent, I look at it probably every few minutes. It's not the phone that rings, oh, you have a message, but it's my anticipation of there might be a message. And obviously that's a human trait, and I probably won't get rid of it, of my own behavior, but like you said, maybe it's our job to design technology in a way that we will only have the upside and not have the downside, and we will encourage people for good behavior and improve interhuman relationships, and just objects that will make it easy for us to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing.
Isn't this the point of control, though? Like, that we need something that
There's always a downside.
Yeah. So you want them to control you. You want the phone to control your lack of ability to control yourself.
Yeah, but then also, I'm very fond of the idea of a considerate, educated consumer, but I think that's pretty hard to achieve. So I guess sometimes it's easier for us and more comfortable for us to give some certain responsibility away from us to the object. So I could imagine that we would sometimes benefit from being a little bit restricted if it's for a good purpose, but as long as it's questioned all the time if we have to be restricted in that way.
So maybe that's why we need robots then. It sounds like a bit of policing in a way to me. It sounds like that we tend to blame our objects rather than ourselves, and blame our surroundings. The phone is really quite an idiotic machine, of course very technologically advanced, but it's a machine that you can choose to switch on or off. Of course, as a society, we become more codependent on it, but I think to give this responsibility to design, to the profession of designer, to the designer, is kind of authority on what is okay or not okay for you to use at a certain moment, is a scary notion to me.
Yeah, but then I did not want to say that this is solely the role of a designer, but definitely the role of a society itself. Because, I don't know, me as someone who's grown up basically with the internet and phones all the time, and my parents in a generation that did not fully understand what it is, I think we had to find out like how things work and what is dangerous and what not, and which behavior works for us and what not on our own. But I guess that for all the next generations, for all the kids to come, that's actually something that should be taught. So I could imagine like parents in the future not having to talk about sexual education with their kids anymore, but also about internet purpose and like how do you interact with technology, because we're okay right now do that. If everyone gets pregnant, so do it.
I think it's possible to have persuasive technology to use that as long as you have control over it. You decide freely, I'm going to use this technology to, stop smoking, stop drinking, or something like that. I think it's not necessarily scary.
It's not always policing. I just wanted to mention like certain apps or interface that makes it easy for you to do something. Or like if you take Facebook as an example, there was the like button but never the dislike button. And then even with the new reactions, as they call it, there's still no option to purposely dislike stuff from other people, even if there should be one maybe, but they decided that it's not nice, and therefore you can then write the person a comment and resolve your disliking of the content in a maybe more meaningful exchange than just saying, I don't like it. On the other hand, just liking it seems more okay because it makes you happy and it's an easy interaction. That just as an example.
Of course, I completely agree that design has a role, otherwise we would probably not be here. But I just wanted to stress this notion of that we shouldn't lay too much
absolutely right. We should
responsibility
be
on that. Yes. And I think there's also some good transformations, like the 80s were all about microwave cooking and margarine and stuff like that. And now I think we eat, well, the way the food is made is not grown is not as better, but we are more aware of what we put in our mouth. So I think we can become more aware through design, communication, branding, etc. So.
Absolutely, that was one of the examples I had sent you in advance. I'm gonna read that for our audience too. Also in the book, What Things Do, there was the example of the microwave oven, and you can't blame the microwave oven or the designer of the microwave oven for bad eating habits. There is other industries that then provide frozen foods and ready-made meals that you can put in there and have that lifestyle. There's advertisements and marketing suggesting, like we saw with the plastics, suggesting that this is a great thing right now and you need to do it because it's the coolest, easiest way. And then as awareness comes, we have the counter movement of trying to have advertisements that everything needs to be organic and vegan and whatnot. So I think we must not underestimate the role of influence of design and advertising.
Yes, and I would still not underestimate the role of the material object, because once it's
absolutely
there, it's very tempting to use it, to buy it, and so on. And this is happening also a bit with robotics, that it's kind of pushed onto us as a society at the moment. It's not that there was a demand for it. There also wasn't demand for an iPhone and so on. So there's a kind of push from the technology side and from the business side. And so once it's there, it will have certain effects, and it will be tempting to use it in certain ways. So yes, you can switch your phone off, but you don't do it, right? And so it's
socially
it's very difficult. Socially, so it becomes mixed with your psychology and with our social relations, and then it's difficult to do something.
Yeah, so I think technology is just an amplifier. I think to me it does change the way we think and the way, even on a biological scale, the way our brain works. I mean, our attention span gets smaller. There's some things that are just, like, researchers have proved those things. And I read about the idea of doing an opposite Turing test to actually see how much behavior we've taken over from machines, and I think that's a lot more than we think.
Absolutely. I also think that the technology and like this term of natural and artificial, or human and robotic, it becomes blurred more and more, and we are not aware of that. And it's kind of this mirror image that we have with our machines. They have always been our mirror image, and we to them.
But I feel the more humanoid we design them, the more it also changes the way we interact with each other. Because if I have a humanoid robot and I can treat it as I want, and it won't give me any negative feedback, then I guess at some point that will also feed into the way I treat my fellow humans.
Yeah, on this panel, I think we have discussed a lot right now. If there are any questions or remarks from the audience, we would like now to open the discussion up a little bit.
First, thanks for some interesting comments on this very interesting topic. It's a topic I'm also quite interested and engaged in. And my question is more, will relate to this idea that I think has been discussed quite a lot in this discussion. And it revolves around this idea, them and us distinction. And I really wonder, when I hear a lot of these discussions and debates, that we tend to assume that robots will experience the world in the same way we do. So, for example, the comment about they should have the same values and so on, I find it a bit strange as well. Not so much because it's in the future, but more because the way that data and the way that AIs and robots perceive the world is really different. Like, they don't see aesthetic, nice, pixelated surrounding. They see data sets and lines in stripes that makes sense to them. And in a sense, I think we have to also consider the world that they see in the way that these artificial intelligence and robots, how they interact with the world, how do they recognize humans. Actually, a lot of AIs are not very good at recognize humans at all. So when we think about how are we going to coexist with robots, we really have to consider this different embodiment that they have, either because they don't have a very restricted embodiment or because they do, because they have to be in a certain role or certain position in society. So maybe a question to the panel is, first of all, to keep carefully a distinction between AI and robotics, because embodiment is very central to robotics and maybe not so much to AI. And then also, I think when we encounter other people who see the world differently from us, and they even might have the same constitution, how do we deal with these problems? So I think central to this discussion about us versus them is really should we focus on the difference or the sameness? And yeah, how do we do this best in a society where we can already see that this causes a lot of conflicts? For example, refugees or global warming and so on. I mean, it's a quite big and broad question now, but I'm really interested in this sameness difference also related to this embodiment.
First, nobody's sure which scenario is going to lead us 10,000 years into the future. There are two main scenarios, I think. One is the transhumanism, so we will become the robots, or the other is humans will just disappear and the robots will be what's left. Maybe there are some others, but for me, those are the two paths. Now, concerning your remark about how they perceive the world differently, obviously you're absolutely right. There is some very abstract things going on in deep learning with AI that people cannot perceive. But on the other hand, there are a lot of dangers right now where AI systems are already seeing the world too much like we do, without us realizing it in the beginning. That is a real problem right now with people developing in AI fields, because we're using data sets of people that are not just the common human being, but most of them are Western European, for instance. And most, when you're trying to determine a threat level, for instance, in fields that are researching terrorism threats, then they notice that many of these data sets they're using are already very biased and looking the world through the eyes of Western Europeans, because we make the most data, and not just the whole world like we would expect it to be.
I actually think that you raise a very, very interesting topic about empathy towards robots and their feelings. And what I find very interesting in this case is that most of our emotions are actually closely correlated to us being biological beings. So depending on what kind of definition you use, we have 5 to 21 senses, and they're really, really closely related to our emotional landscape. So obviously, we perceive the world in a certain way, and this kind of perception shapes our emotion. And obviously, robotics, or in this case AI, if we separate them clearly, they will have a very, very different perception because they're artificial, because they work with sensors, because their senses just work differently. So obviously, their emotions will also be different. But I guess right now, it's quite hard for us to understand because it's still us and them. It's not one society. It's not one kind of merge. And I guess probably the merge will come naturally, and suddenly we will understand certain things. And even if it sounds scary, maybe some of our now human emotions are lost. Maybe in the future we won't be hungry anymore. So that would kind of erase some certain emotions. But then on the other hand, there's like a huge range of emotions we could gather. So I don't know, there's already the people who augment their bodies with magnets, and suddenly they are able to feel magnet fields. So what kind of emotions could emerge from technology merging with bodies? Maybe there's some kind of very specific term for them then. I don't know, like we already have this in different languages, that different cultures have different linguistics for emotions. I don't know, for example, a good example is Wanderlust. There is no other language that has that kind of feeling formed into a word. So maybe in the future there will be a word for how does it feel if your battery is freshly charged? How does it feel to connect with a Wi-Fi that is secure? How does it feel to, I don't know, share some parts with another robot or cyborg or anyone? So.
I'd like to add another remark here. There is the hypothesis of the bicameral mind, and the idea of the writer is now, the name of the writer is escaping me, Mark will know him, but there is an idea that people 3,000 years ago weren't self-conscious at all. They were all having bicameral minds, so that means you're just acting, doing what you do in life, and there is a voice inside your head that is telling you what to do. But there was no connection, they believe, between yourself and the voice that is telling you, drink this water, talk to these people, for instance. So this is only 3,000 years ago. In a way, it is similar to where robots are almost at this point. So they have so they're autonomous, but there is still a voice outside, so we telling them what to do, and at some point they also evolved in something we can understand and relate to. So that has, it was a connection I just made in my head.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good example because like humans, I think there's actually this theory that this is where religion comes from, that we suddenly realize there's a voice inside or like some kind of desires and goals, and we did not understand that this is ourselves. But that's obviously only one theory, so I don't want to criticize anything here. But I guess as technology progresses, it's somehow along the way will also become autonomous and will also realize that it is a being and realize that there is a self and there is purpose to maybe strive for. So I guess that's just something we have to observe along the way, I guess.
Okay, as the museum needs to be closed, we are still working people here, not robots, in 10 minutes. I would suggest that if there are any more questions or remarks, we can have a chat in our restaurant next door, if someone wants to have a drink there as well with our panelists. Otherwise, I would wish you a very nice evening, and thank you very much for coming.